The scream tore through the cold, crisp night air, silencing the crickets and startling a stray dog that yelped and scampered away. Inside the tiny, two-room house on Old Saltillo Road, the midwife, Edna Robinson, worked with quick, practiced hands. The room was dimly lit by the flickering light of a coal oil lamp, casting shadows that danced on the whitewashed walls. The only sounds were the labored breathing of Gladys Love Smith Presley and the muffled cries of a newborn. Vernon Presley, only 20 years old, paced outside, his breath forming small clouds in the January chill. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear and anticipation. He had built this house with his own hands, a symbol of his love for Gladys and the life they hoped to build together. But now, as he waited, the future seemed as uncertain as the weather. Inside Gladys's face was a mask of pain and concentration. She was only 22, and this was her first child. The midwife, a woman with a kind face and steady hands, encouraged her to push. "Just a little more, Gladys," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. After what felt like an eternity, a tiny, shriveled form emerged. The midwife quickly cleaned the baby and handed him to Gladys, but the joy was short-lived. The baby's skin was cold and blue, and no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't get him to cry. The stillborn boy, named Jesse, was placed on a blanket, a silent witness to the grief that filled the room. Gladys's sobs echoed through the house, a sound that Vernon would never forget. He couldn't bear to see her in such pain, so he stepped outside to get some air. As he walked around the yard, he noticed a strange blue glow emanating from the house. It was as if the light from the coal oil lamp had taken on a life of its own, casting a mystical aura around the small building. Just then, he heard a faint cry from inside. His heart leaped, and he rushed back into the house. The midwife was holding another baby, this one pink and healthy, wailing with all the strength of a new life. Vernon's hands trembled as he took his son, a perfect, tiny miracle, into his arms. Gladys, still weak but smiling through her tears, reached out to touch the baby's cheek. They named him Elvis, after Vernon's middle name, and gave him the middle name Aaron, to rhyme with Garin, the name of his stillborn brother. The baby was placed in the warmest spot in the house, the oven, wrapped snugly in a shoebox. Vernon and Gladys watched over him, their hearts filled with a mix of relief and hope. The next day, Dr. William Hunt visited to fill out the birth certificate. He registered the baby as Elvis Aaron Presley, the unusual spelling of his middle name a reflection of the local pronunciation. But as Elvis grew, he would insist on the traditional spelling, and his tombstone would read Elvis Aaron Presley. The Presleys' house was a simple one, with no electricity, no running water, and no indoor plumbing. The yard was bare dirt, and the only toilet was an outhouse. But it was a home, a place where a family could dream and hope. Vernon and Gladys were determined to give their son a better life, a life filled with love and opportunity. As the sun rose over East Tupelo, casting a golden glow over the small house, Vernon held his newborn son and whispered, "We'll make it, little one, we'll make it." The Presleys were a family that clung to each other through thick and thin. In Tupelo, Mississippi, they found solace in their faith. The First Assembly of God Church, where Elvis's great-uncle served as a preacher, became a second home. It was here, in the wooden church on Adams Street, that Elvis's earliest memories formed. Sitting on his mother's lap, he was captivated by the singing and couldn't resist joining in, even though he was just a toddler. The church was a place of deep faith and strict rules. They believed the Bible was the literal word of God, and they took it seriously. When Jesus said, "He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved," there was no room for doubt. The services were lively, filled with singing, dancing, and shouting. This uninhibited expression of faith would later influence Elvis's own performances. Gladys, Elvis's mother, was incredibly protective. She had lost his twin brother at birth, and this loss made her even more devoted to Elvis. She never let him out of her sight, even walking him to school every day until he was in elementary school. This constant care made Elvis feel loved, but also shy and lonely. He often visited his brother's grave, and at a young age, he began to hear a voice in his head that he believed was his twin, Jesse. This voice became his conscience, guiding him to be kind and caring. Elvis grew into a gentle boy who didn't like to hurt others. When his father, Vernon, asked him to go hunting, Elvis refused, saying, "Daddy, I don't want to kill birds." Vernon respected his son's compassion and didn't push him. One of Elvis's most cherished possessions was a red and gold tricycle he received for Christmas when he was 5. He rode it around the yard, thrilled with joy. But his generosity led him to give it away, much to his parents' dismay. They managed to retrieve it once, but when it disappeared again, they let it go, seeing it as a sign of his sharing spirit. In 1941, Elvis started school at East Tupelo, Consolidated. He was a sweet and average student, but the mix of students from different grades made him nervous, and he developed a stutter. The family moved around a lot, following Vernon's job opportunities. They spent time in Pascagoula and Memphis, where Vernon worked in a munitions plant. For 2 years, Elvis and Gladys stayed in Tupelo while Vernon worked in Memphis, only seeing each other on weekends. After the war ended in 1945, Vernon returned home with savings and bought a house on Berry Street. Elvis, influenced by his parents' faith, committed his life to Jesus and was baptized. Vernon, known for his dry wit and tight-lipped demeanor, balanced out Gladys's gregarious and caring personality. They lived in a tight-knit family, often staying in their own little world. Elvis's early interest in music was encouraged by his neighbor, Carvel Lee Osborne, known as Mississippi Slim. Slim played guitar and hosted a radio show. Elvis idolized him and performed on Slim's show, the Saturday Jamboree. Though Slim thought Elvis had potential, he also noticed that the young boy struggled to keep time. Elvis's first big moment came in 1945, when he was picked to lead the morning prayer at school. After the prayer, he sang Old Shep, a song about a boy and his dog. His heartfelt performance impressed the teacher, who entered him in a talent contest at the Mississippi-Alabama Fair and Dairy Show. Standing on a chair to reach the microphone, Elvis sang with such emotion that he won a prize, boosting his self-esteem. Encouraged by his success, Gladys and Vernon bought Elvis his first guitar for his 11th birthday. It was small and cheap, but he learned to play chords and began performing for the congregation at church. Music became a passion, and he started carrying his guitar to school, storing it in his locker, and playing gospel songs with his friend Billy Welch during lunch. In 1948, Vernon and Gladys decided to move to Memphis, a city that offered more opportunities. They packed up their belongings and drove north on Highway 78, leaving behind the small town of Tupelo for a new life in a big city. Memphis, with its diverse culture and vibrant music scene, would become the place where Elvis's dreams would start to take shape. After almost a year in Memphis, the Presleys finally moved into Lauderdale Courts in September 1949. Elvis was just starting high school at Hume's. The Presleys, especially his mother Gladys, were very protective of Elvis. They treated him like a toddler, and one neighbor noticed how finicky he was, especially about his comic books and his own set of dishes. Elvis had a tough time at school. He stuttered a bit, and the other kids called him a mama's boy and a loner. They often taunted and harassed him. Some even hid and threw rotten fruit at him when he walked home. But over time, Elvis made 3 friends at the courts: Buzzy Forbes, Paul Doer, and Farley Guy. They played football, went to the pool, and rode their bikes together. During the summer of 1950, Elvis's dad, Vernon, bought him a push lawn mower. Elvis and his friends started mowing lawns and trimming grass around the neighborhood. Elvis came home with $7 on his first day, proud of his earnings. Gladys, always looking out for her shy son, arranged for guitar lessons. She asked Reverend J.J. Denson's wife if her husband could teach Elvis. The job fell to Denson's son, Jesse Lee, who was reluctant at first. Jesse Lee was a bit of a troublemaker, but a talented musician. He agreed to teach Elvis, only after his mother convinced him that Jesus was watching. The lessons took place in the laundry room below the Presleys' apartment. Elvis practiced on Jesse Lee's Martin guitar, learning chords and picking styles. As summer came, they would play music under the magnolia trees, and Elvis let Jesse Lee do most of the singing. Elvis's music drew the attention of the girls in the neighborhood. They would gather to listen to him play and sing songs by Bing Crosby, Perry Como, and Hank Williams. He preferred to sing in the dark, feeling shy and self-conscious about his acne. One time, at his cousin Bobby's birthday party, Elvis insisted on turning out all the lights before he started playing. In his sophomore year, Elvis found a job as an usher at Lowe's State Theater. He even got a job with Precision Tool Company, where his uncles worked. But he was laid off when an insurance inspector discovered he was underage. Radio was a big part of the Presleys' life. They would gather around the radio on Saturday nights to listen to the Grand Ole Opry. Other times they enjoyed a mix of country, gospel, and popular music. Elvis was particularly drawn to the gospel music at the East Trigg Baptist Church, where he met Dewey Phillips, a white DJ who played music by both white and black artists. Phillips encouraged white listeners to attend the church's gospel services, and Elvis often went, sitting at the back. Music became Elvis's passion. He spent time at Charlie's record store, listening to new songs and playing them on the jukebox. He visited WMPS for interviews with gospel groups and cruised to Overton Park to listen to orchestral music. He loved opera and old recordings of Caruso. When he played his guitar, you never knew what kind of music he would perform: gospel, country, or even opera. Elvis's style started to change in his junior year. He dressed more neatly, bought new loafers, and started wearing black slacks with stripes and a black sport coat with the collar turned up. He wore a scarf around his neck and let his hair grow out, using Vaseline to keep it in place. He also let his sideburns grow, inspired by the truckers he admired. His new look drew stares and comments, but Elvis didn't let it bother him. When he tried out for the football team, the other players teased him and threatened to cut his hair. A tough guy named Red West stepped in and protected him. But the coach, Boyce, eventually kicked Elvis off the team because of his hair. Despite the pressure, Elvis refused to conform. While Elvis was finishing high school, something big was happening in music. The raw sounds of Southern blues were evolving into a new genre called rhythm and blues. In March 1951, a song called Rocket 88 by Jackie Brunston and his Delta Cats, actually Ike Turner's band, became a hit. Bill Haley and the Saddlemen recorded a cover which became a minor hit. This new sound would soon become rock and roll. In Cleveland, a music store owner named Leo Mintz noticed that white teenagers were drawn to the rhythm and blues music he stocked. He met a DJ named Alan Freed and helped him get a late-night show where he could play this music. Freed called it rock and roll and hosted the first rock concert, the Moondog Coronation Ball, in 1952. It was a huge success, and the music world would never be the same. Elvis had always felt a deep connection to music. It was more than just a hobby, it was his life. After graduating from Humes High School in June 1953, he started working at M.B. Parker Machinist Shop. The job paid the bills, but it didn't fulfill his dreams. He spent his free time listening to the radio and playing his guitar, always wondering what it would be like to hear his own voice on a record. One hot Saturday in June, Elvis decided to take a step towards his dream. He walked into the Memphis recording service on Union Avenue. The place was run by Sam Phillips, a man who had a knack for discovering talented musicians. Elvis spoke with Marion Kasker, a friendly blonde in her mid-30s. She told him it would cost $3.98 to record a two-sided acetate. Elvis agreed, hoping this would be his big break. He sat and chatted with Marion while waiting for his turn. When asked what kind of singer he was, he simply said, "I sing all kinds." When asked who he sounded like, he replied, "I don't sound like nobody." These answers were honest, but they also hinted at his unique style. Finally, it was his turn. Elvis walked into the recording booth with his cheap guitar. He recorded two ballads, My Happiness and That's When Your Heartaches Begin. After finishing, he looked up at Phillips through the glass, hoping for some encouragement. Phillips only said his performance was interesting, and that he might call him sometime. Elvis left with his acetate, but the call never came. Months passed, and Elvis tried again. He visited the studio a few times, asking Marion if anyone needed a singer. Each time, the answer was the same, friendly but non-committal. In January 1954, he recorded two more songs, but still, nothing happened. He started attending the Assembly of God Church, where he joined a choir and even tried out for the Songfellows. But they rejected him, telling him he couldn't sing. The pastor's son even suggested he give up. These rejections stung, but Elvis didn't lose hope. At his job, Elvis faced more challenges. Once, his boss threatened to fire him, if he didn't get a haircut. He found a new job with Crown Electric, where he drove delivery trucks. The owners liked him for his courtesy and respectful demeanor, but he still felt unfulfilled. In April 1954, Elvis learned about an opening in a country band at the High Hat Club. He auditioned wearing a short toread or jacket over a pink shirt. Despite his nervousness, he performed 2 songs. The band's leader, Eddie Bond, told him to stick with driving a truck, saying he would never make it as a singer. The rejection was brutal, but Elvis didn't give up. Finally, on Saturday, June 26, 1954, the call came. Marion Kasker phoned Elvis, saying Sam Phillips wanted him to come to the studio. Elvis was so excited that he was at the studio before she hung up. Phillips had a new song called Without You, and thought Elvis might be the right fit. They spent the day trying to get a good performance, but it wasn't working. Phillips encouraged Elvis to sing something that meant a lot to him. After hours of trying, Phillips let him go, but Elvis knew he had his chance. The following weekend, Scotty Moore, a guitarist with his own band, stopped by Sun Records. Sam Phillips told Scotty about Elvis and suggested he audition him. The next day, Elvis drove to Scotty's house, and with Bill Black on bass, they ran through a few songs. Scotty and Bill weren't particularly impressed, but Sam encouraged them to meet again at the studio. On Monday, July 5, 1954, they gathered at 7 p.m. The session was tough. They tried several songs, but nothing clicked. Hours passed, and they were about to give up when Elvis started mumbling words to an upbeat melody. It was That's All Right, a rhythm and blues song by Arthur Crudup. Elvis started moving around the room, and Bill and Scotty joined in, feeling the energy. Sam Phillips, who had been working in the booth, heard them and asked them to do it again. When they played back the recording, everyone was amazed. The music had a unique blend of country and rhythm and blues. Scotty said, "Good God, they'll run us out of town when they hear this," but they all knew it was special. For the first time, Elvis felt like he was on the right path. He had found his sound, and it was something the world had never heard before. Phillips knew he had captured something special with Elvis Presley. He brought Elvis, Scotty Moore, and Bill Black back to the studio night after night, hoping to recreate the magic. But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't capture that same spark again. Still, Phillips was convinced that the song That's All Right was a hit. He called his friend Dewey Phillips, a popular DJ, to come listen. Dewey arrived at the studio late at night and listened to the tape several times. He didn't react strongly, but Phillips was sure Dewey could hear the potential. Dewey left around 3 in the morning, saying he needed to think about it. The next morning he called back, excited. He said the song had been on his mind all night and asked for 2 acetate copies. He wanted to play it on his Red Hot and Blue show that evening. Phillips spent the day making and delivering the acetates. He called Elvis to tell him the news. Elvis was thrilled but also terrified. He worried that the song might flop and make him a laughingstock in Memphis. Too nervous to listen himself, he told his mother to keep the radio tuned to WHBQ and then went to a movie theater to hide. Dewey's show started at 9. Around 9:30, the Presley family heard Dewey introduce the song. As soon as it played, the station started getting calls and telegrams. People wanted to hear it again and again. Dewey played the song 14 times during his 3-hour show and received hundreds of calls. After the first few plays, Dewey called the Presleys' house and invited Elvis to the studio for an interview. Elvis was so nervous, he had gone to hide in the movie theater. His mother found him and told him to go to the station. When Elvis arrived, Dewey welcomed him and told him to relax. Dewey asked a few questions about Elvis's background, not realizing the microphone was live. Elvis was surprised when Dewey told him the interview was over. He had been sitting in front of a live microphone the whole time. Encouraged by the success, Phillips called the group back to the studio on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. They finally found a suitable B-side, Blue Moon of Kentucky. This song had been a hit for Bill Monroe, but the way they played it was completely different. Because of its country roots, Elvis and his band, known as the Blue Moon Boys, were often booked in hillbilly clubs and on country shows. Phillips suggested that Scotty Moore manage Elvis, given his experience with the Starlight Wranglers. An agreement was drawn up, and Scotty started booking gigs. One of the first was at the Bon Air Club, where Elvis performed his 2 songs during a show by the Starlight Wranglers. Despite his nervousness, Elvis was well received and was asked back several times. Bob Neal, a DJ at WMPS, was putting together a hillbilly hoedown at the Overton Park Band Shell on July 30th. Based on the response to Elvis's record, Neal booked him. On the day of the show, Elvis was on edge. He was scared stiff as he took the stage. When they started playing That's All Right, the crowd's reaction was electrifying. The up-tempo music and Elvis's leg shaking drew squeals from the women. During the instrumental section, Elvis let himself go, and the crowd went wild. Elvis thought they were making fun of him at first, but Scotty reassured him. They were called back for an encore and played Blue Moon of Kentucky again. This time, Elvis exaggerated his movements, and the crowd went even more boisterous. Elvis left the stage to thunderous applause. Dixie Locke, Elvis's girlfriend, watched from the audience with mixed feelings. She was happy for his success, but sensed that it might change their relationship. A few days later, Elvis, Scotty, and Bill were booked to play at the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. Despite the show's success in Memphis, some DJs resisted playing the record, thinking it was too country for R&B listeners and not country enough for country fans. On October 3rd, they performed at the Grand Ole Opry. Elvis was nervous about meeting Bill Monroe, who had recorded the original Blue Moon of Kentucky. To his surprise, Monroe was gracious and even re-recorded the song in the new style. However, the Opry's manager, Jim Denny, told Elvis that he wasn't right for the show and advised him to keep driving a truck. Despite this setback, the appearance gave Elvis credibility and led to regular bookings on the Louisiana Hayride, a popular radio show in Shreveport, Louisiana. By this time, Elvis's second record, Good Rockin' Tonight, was out. It was a remake of a 1947 song by Roy Brown, but with a country twist. The record was a hit, and people began to call the new sound rockabilly. Elvis's reputation grew, and he picked up a drummer, DJ Fontana, from his appearances on the Hayride. Bob Neal, who had booked Elvis for the Overton Park show, became the group's agent. In January 1955, Elvis released Milk Cow Blues Boogie, and in June, Baby Let's Play House, which reached number 5 on the Billboard Country Singles chart. Bob Neal got Elvis a tryout for Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts, a national TV show. Elvis flew to New York, but he flunked the audition. He was humiliated and checked his mailbox daily for a letter that never came. On the road, however, Elvis's popularity continued to grow. He started headlining shows and even sparked a riot in Jacksonville, Florida. Despite his success, Elvis remained humble. He told his friend George Klein that he wasn't competing with Hank Snow or Webb Pierce. He was aiming for Bill Haley, who was making waves with rock and roll. In May 1955, Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and his Comets exploded nationally. The rock and roll revolution was underway, and Elvis was right in the middle of it. In April 1954, Elvis Presley recorded Rock Around the Clock, but his label Decca didn't see its potential. They put it on the B-side of another song, 13 Women and Only One Man in Town. Even so, the record made it onto the Billboard charts but soon faded. Then, in the fall of 1955, something unexpected happened. A movie called Blackboard Jungle was in production, focusing on the issue of juvenile delinquency. The director needed a song that captured the spirit of the youth of the day. Glenn Ford, the star of the film, brought some of his son's records to the set, and Rock Around the Clock was chosen as the perfect fit. When the movie premiered in March 1955, the song became more popular than the movie itself. Teenagers couldn't sit still during the opening credits. They jumped up and danced in the aisles. Some even went to see the movie multiple times just to hear the song. Decca finally saw the opportunity and re-released the record in May 1955, this time as the aside. The song quickly climbed the charts and reached number 1 on July 9, 1955. This marked the beginning of the rock and roll era, and the enthusiasm shown at the movie screenings became the norm for rock and roll events. Rock and roll was a huge cultural shift. Many adults, preachers, teachers, politicians, and parents saw it as a threat to morality and order. They worried that the intense emotions it stirred could lead to crime and immorality. In the South, there was also concern about the mixing of races. Elvis's style and energy often made people assume he was black, which caused tension. Some African-American musicians, like Bo Diddley and Chuck Berry, felt that Elvis's success was partly due to his white skin, allowing him to achieve fame by copying their style. Elvis's rise to fame wasn't without danger. His mother, Gladys, was always worried about him, especially when he toured the South. One night after a show in Jacksonville, Elvis made a joke about meeting fans backstage, and hundreds of teenagers stormed the stage. By the time the police arrived, Elvis's coat, shirt, and even his boots were torn off. Another time, he was nearly attacked by a jealous boyfriend after a concert in Lubbock, Texas. Gladys's fears were not just about physical danger. She once woke up in a panic, envisioning Elvis in a burning car. It turned out he had been driving near Texarkana when his car's engine caught fire, and he and his band had to jump out. He called home the next morning, but he didn't want to worry his mother, so he played it down. Later, he was in a near crash in a chartered plane in Arkansas, which made him fear air travel for years. Elvis's career was managed by Bob Neal, but in early 1955, Neal introduced him to an agent named Colonel Tom Parker. Parker was actually a Dutchman named Andreas Cornelis van Kuijk, but no one knew his real identity until after Elvis's death. Parker had a history in show business, working with artists like Gene Austin and Eddie Arnold. He saw Elvis's potential and gradually took over his career, maneuvering Neal out of the picture. Elvis was still a minor, so his father, Vernon, had to co-sign the contract with Parker on August 15, 1955. Gladys never really liked Parker, but the deal was done. Elvis's early career was marked by rejection and discouragement. He had been rejected by the Songfellows, told by Eddie Bond that he would never be a singer, and advised by the Grand Ole Opry's manager to go back to driving a truck. Despite these setbacks, he kept pushing forward. He wondered why he was the one chosen to become a star, why he heard the call that others didn't. He believed that some invisible tracks had been laid out for him, and he was the only one who had climbed aboard. Colonel Parker's timing was perfect. Just after signing with Elvis, I Forgot to Remember to Forget Her and Mystery Train became hits, especially on the country charts. Parker saw that Sun Records was too small to fully support Elvis's potential. He negotiated with RCA, and in November 1955, Elvis signed with them for $40,000. He received $5,000, which he used to buy his mother a new pink Ford, even though she couldn't drive. In December 1955, songwriter Mee Axton met Elvis and played him a demo of Heartbreak Hotel. The song was inspired by a news story about a man who jumped from a hotel window, leaving a note that said, "I walk a lonely street." Elvis loved the song and memorized it. Mee offered him 1/3 of the royalties, if he would make it his first single for RCA. He agreed and performed it at a concert on December 9th, but he didn't record it until January 10th, 1956, at RCA Studio in Nashville. The recording session was electric. Elvis was in his element, and even Chet Atkins, a veteran guitarist, was blown away. The song was released on January 27th, 1956, and Elvis made his first nationwide TV appearance on CBS stage show the next day. After a few more appearances, he finally performed Heartbreak Hotel on the show on February 11th. The song gradually gained popularity and hit the Billboard Top 100 on March 17th. By May 3rd, it reached number 1 and stayed there for 6 weeks. It sold over 1 million copies and became Elvis's first gold record. Heartbreak Hotel was a game-changer. It was unlike anything people had heard before. Its raw emotion and gritty sound shook the music industry. In Europe, it was played on Radio Luxembourg, and it changed the lives of young people like John Lennon and George Harrison, who were just starting their musical journeys. Elvis's fame grew rapidly. He continued to perform on Louisiana Hayride and toured the country, playing in cities big and small. However, his 2-week engagement at the New Frontier Hotel in Las Vegas in April 1956 didn't go well. The audience was too old and didn't appreciate his style. But his TV appearances on Stage Show and Milton Berle's show were a hit. His energetic performances, especially his movements, were controversial. Critics called them primitive and obscene, but the young audience loved it. Ed Sullivan, the host of the most popular variety show, initially refused to have Elvis on his show, but the pressure from his audience was too much. On September 9, 1956, Elvis finally appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, and it was a historic moment. The rock and roll era was in full swing, and Elvis was at the center of it all. Elvis's popularity kept growing with each live show. The crowd's excitement was so intense that Scotty, Bill, and J could barely hear themselves play. Scotty jokingly said they were the only band led by Elvis's hips. Despite his growing fame, Elvis faced challenges. Ed Sullivan, a popular TV host, initially refused to let Elvis on his show. But Steve Allen, another TV host, saw an opportunity and booked Elvis for a July 1st show. Allen asked Elvis to wear a tuxedo and sing Hound Dog to a basset hound dressed in a top hat and bow tie. Surprisingly, the show was a huge hit, and Elvis's performance drew more viewers than Sullivan's show. By September, Ed Sullivan realized he couldn't ignore Elvis's popularity. On September 9, 1956, Elvis appeared on Sullivan's show, and it became a historic night. Over 60 million people, or more than one-third of the U.S. population, tuned in to watch him. Elvis didn't even travel to New York. He was in Los Angeles filming his first movie, Love Me Tender. Elvis's success didn't stop there. In 1956, he released 5 of the best-selling singles in America, including Heartbreak Hotel and Hound Dog. He was just 21, and his music resonated with a generation of young people who were looking for a way to escape the worries of the atomic age and enjoy the present. In February 1957, Elvis returned to Hollywood to film Loving You, a movie about a delivery boy who becomes a star. Though it wasn't the serious role he wanted, it was a step in his acting career. He had a deep admiration for James Dean, and even memorized long stretches of Dean's dialogue from Rebel Without a Cause. Elvis used his newfound wealth to buy a home for his family in Memphis. However, his fans soon overwhelmed the neighborhood, so he asked his parents to find a larger, more private home. They found a mansion called Graceland, which Elvis bought on March 19, 1957. Elvis's romantic life was also complex. He had relationships with several women, including June Juanico and Anita Wood. Despite his reputation as a sex symbol, he had a deep spiritual side. On his third appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show, he performed a gospel song, Peace in the Valley, showing his faith to his audience. In September 1957, Elvis recorded a Christmas album, dedicating one side to religious songs. The album was a huge success and remains the best-selling Christmas album of all time. However, his success came with challenges. On December 20, 1957, Elvis received his draft notice. He was called for a physical in January and a pre-induction questionnaire in October. Colonel Parker tried to delay his service, but Elvis was eventually ordered to report on January 20, 1958. He completed his training at Fort Hood, Texas, and his family moved nearby to be close to him. Elvis's mother, Gladys, was struggling with health issues and depression. She missed Elvis deeply and often turned to alcohol to cope. When he was deployed to Germany, her condition worsened. In August 1958, Gladys was diagnosed with hepatitis and taken to a hospital in Memphis. Elvis rushed to her side, but she passed away on August 14, 1958, at the age of 46. Elvis was devastated and took a leave of absence from the army to grieve. When he returned to Fort Hood, Elvis was a changed man. He was soon deployed to Germany, where he was initially assigned to drive a tank, but later switched to driving a jeep. He brought his father, grandmother, and 2 friends to Germany, and they lived in Bad Nauheim, a town near his post. Despite the challenges, Elvis continued to be a symbol of hope and entertainment for his fans and fellow soldiers. Elvis Presley's journey through the army and Germany was a significant chapter in his life, shaping him both spiritually and personally. After the heart-wrenching loss of his mother, Gladys, Elvis turned to the comfort of the Bible and found solace in Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. The book's poetic and wise messages resonated with him, and he often shared it with friends, finding in it a new way to cope with his grief. In Germany, Elvis's life was a mix of routine and adventure. He settled into a house on Gothastrasse, where he played music, trained in karate, and formed deep friendships. His karate instructor, Jurgen Sadel, not only taught him the physical discipline, but also engaged in long, late-night discussions about spirituality and the mysteries of the world. These conversations expanded Elvis's worldview, blending his Christian faith with new ideas. Despite the stability, there were challenges. His father, Vernon, found solace in a relationship with Dee Stanley, which Elvis found difficult to accept. However, he chose to support his father rather than confront him, showing a maturity and understanding that came from his own struggles. One of the most significant relationships Elvis formed in Germany was with Priscilla Beaulieu. Their initial meeting was chaperoned, but over time, their bond grew. Elvis was always respectful and gentlemanly, earning the trust of Priscilla's parents. This relationship would later become one of the most enduring in his life. Elvis also dated other women, including the famous Vera Tishachawa, but it was his connection with Priscilla that stood out. Their relationship added a layer of complexity to his public image, as the media often sensationalized his love life. In the army, Elvis tried to be a regular soldier, despite his fame. He donated his pay to charity, bought extra uniforms for his fellow soldiers, and even spent a week in the hospital with tonsillitis, which he cleverly extended by manipulating a thermometer. His dedication to his duties earned him respect and 3 promotions, from private to sergeant. On March 2, 1960, Elvis left Germany, returning to the United States with a sense of accomplishment and a desire to restart his career. His first post-Army album, Elvis Is Back, was a hit, and he made a memorable appearance on the Frank Sinatra Timex special. He then headed to Hollywood to film G.I. Blues, a movie that, while not his favorite, pleased his fans. Elvis's next film, Flaming Star, was a more serious Western where he played a conflicted young man caught between two worlds. Despite his effort to focus on acting, the film did not resonate with his fans as he had hoped. After Flaming Star, Elvis returned to his roots by recording a gospel album. Music had always been a part of his life, from his early days in the church choir to his performances on stage. The gospel album was a heartfelt project that allowed him to express his deep faith and love for spiritual music. Elvis's time in the Army and his experiences in Germany were transformative. They not only shaped his personal growth, but also influenced his career, relationships, and spiritual journey. As he moved forward, Elvis carried with him the lessons learned and the people he met, ready to face new challenges and continue making his mark on the world.